vision today wants to improve the quality of life of people living in Africa. And we think the best way to do this is by providing the best possible foreign investment in Africa, both in terms of achieving economic development and also in terms of achieving social development within Africa. And because of that, this House prefers Western investment to Chinese investment in Africa. And where this debate lies today is a debate that's grounded in theory. We're not talking on a practical level because obviously we think that the two types of investment are not mutually exclusive in the real world. We are going to have both elements of Western and Chinese investment going into Africa. But if we were to choose between the two in any particular circumstance, this side of the House would prefer Western investment into Africa. And we're talking here about capital investment. So essentially we're talking about money being pumped into industries within Africa. And we're going to be proving our case through the following case split. I'm going to be looking more at economic development in terms of 2 points. First of all, labor, and secondly, looking at this idea of investment focus. My second speaker is then going to move on to speak about social development, looking first of all at influence, and secondly, this idea of conditional investment. So, with all that set up aside, let's move straight into the positive matter, this whole idea of labor. Now, what we see is that when the West invests in Africa, we're going to see them setting up something like a mine, setting up something like a factory, and they're going to be employing African people within those industries. And we say that's very, very important in Africa because it does two things. First of all, it improves the quality of life of those individuals who are being employed because it allows them access to more things, allows them access to basic needs and luxuries within society, and also because it's important for people's self-actualization when they're employed. But secondly, we say that when these people are employed, it's very useful because it means that those people can then stimulate the African economy. They're able to then use the money that they're earning to buy other goods and so put that money back into the African economy and invest in it in that manner. Now, the difference with Chinese investment is that we see that Chinese has a policy with regard to investing in other countries that they bring their own laborers when they set up these kind of industries. This means that when China sets up an industry with Africa, there are no African people employed within these industries. And that means that these people don't gain any of the benefits that I spoke about that we see under Western investment, those benefits of quality of life and of reinvesting in the African economy. So we don't get those benefits. The reason why we don't get that quality of life, fairly simple, people aren't employed. But in terms of the stimulation of the African economy, we see that when these Chinese employees are brought to Africa, they're not actually buying goods within the African economy. And a good example of this is when China, when China built a set of roads in Malawi in order to transport their own goods, and they brought all their Chinese laborers and also brought everything else that they would need in order to set up this industry. They brought their own flat pack housing. I'll take you in a second. They brought their own sand in order to build these roads. They even brought their own rice, ladies and gentlemen, in order to feed their employees. And so there's no reinvestment into the African economy. Yes, ma'am?
Ma'am, you do realize that in terms of financial aid from Western countries, that they kind of the principles or the laws that they implement is that African countries end up paying back more than the loan they actually got from the Western countries. So you're suggesting that's okay?
Ma'am, we're not looking at loans in this debate. I set it up quite clearly. We're looking at capital investment. We're looking at when foreign countries set up an industry or pump money into an industry. So we think this idea of loans and aid isn't really relevant to today's debate. That deals with it quite succinctly. So what we say is that when you have Western labor policies, that these policies are far better for African economic development because you're employing people and stimulating the economy. So let's move on to this idea of investment focus. And what we see is that when the West comes into Africa, there's an incentive to invest not only in primary industries,
on that point, ma'am,
sort of industries where you're going to be gaining resources, doing things like mining, but there's also an incentive for these companies to invest in manufacturing. And the reason for this is that it's cheaper to manufacture in Africa than it is to manufacture when you're looking at Western countries. Because we see that labor is far more expensive in places like the US than it's going to be in most African countries. So we have the West incentivized to set up essentially two industries in this case. They're going to be investing first of all into the primary industry where they're going to be gaining those resources, and then secondly they're going to be investing in the manufacturing industry. Yes, ma'am?
Are you aware that the implementation methods of these manufacturing industries are set up such that they're not able to be copied easily by local African investors?
We don't see why that would be the case, ma'am. First of all, we'd say that even if they aren't copied, that those initial manufacturing industries bring about a lot of benefit for the country because they're employing local people, unlike under Chinese policy. But also, we don't see why there's any reason why we can't have a skills transfer, why those people who are being employed can't then go and set up another industry. It's certainly not going to happen if you're bringing Chinese people into the country. So we think in terms of that, it's a far better policy. Right, so now we've got these two industries, and we're looking at something like a company that's going to come in and not only mine copper ore, but then also produce copper piping with that ore within that actual country. And that means you're going to be employing more people within the country. You're going to be transferring both primary skills and also manufacturing skills to the people within that country. And you're also going to be providing cheaper goods for individuals within Africa, because essentially what happens is that you don't have to ship it overseas and then wait for that product to be manufactured and then buy that product back in Africa. It also means that in the future, we have the capacity to develop manufacturing industries and ultimately get rid of this resource curse, which is exactly this idea of buying back the goods that were made from the resources that you originally owned. China, on the other hand, doesn't have this kind of a policy. There's no incentive for China to develop a manufacturing industry in Africa simply because labor is far cheaper in China itself. China is an excellent manufacturing economy, and so it's far more beneficial for them to get the resources they need in Africa, take everything back to China, and manufacture it there. And we see that this isn't helpful to Africa at all. You don't gain any of the benefits I spoke about, where you're actually setting up a second industry in Africa, employing more people, and essentially stimulating the economy of these African countries. So what have I shown you today? I've shown you why, in fact, Western labor policies in terms of foreign investment are far more beneficial for the African people. And secondly, why, because of the focus of investment that the West has, both in terms of primary investment and in terms of manufacturing, that is also going to benefit the economy of Africa. And therefore, we must win.